بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا اهدينا إلى طريقة الحق وافتح لنا أبواب الفهم وارزقنا بحسن الاتباع وثبت أقدامنا وكن معنا ولا تكون علينا ونصلي ونسلم على الذي أرسلته بالهدى والدين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله حتى ولو كره الكافرين والكافرون. أما بعد. In this communication, we wanted to focus on an important point when it comes to the knowledge of Islam and the reality of the American community, the indigenous American community. When we look at the history of Islam in the US and in the Americas overall, much of the history is not understood in its proper context. And because much of the history is not understood in its proper context, a lot of times we don't understand how it is that we should proceed as a community. There are a number of different issues that we face in the community that a lot of times go unaddressed. It's too much of a task at the moment to go into details with regard to how Islam manifested itself in the Americas, other than to say that the ties with Islam in the Americas is nothing recent. It's not like a 50-year phenomena like some would like to think. But the relationship with the Americas to Islam has been in the making for hundreds of years. And that's just one phase. We're talking about pretty much the phase of the collapse of Al-Andalus and transatlantic slavery and what that meant. That's one phase. That's not even considering the fact of the possibility of Muslims having been here prior to that, prior to the whole concept of slavery and so on and so forth. But in any event, we don't want to go that route at the moment. But we want to say that those who don't grasp the history of Islam as it unfolded, they don't have an understanding of how to properly engage the Dawah. They don't have an understanding of history as a whole, and the lack of historical consciousness leads people into problems. The Quran itself, a third of the Quran consists of Tawhid. A third of the Quran consists of Ahkam. And a third of the Quran consists of Qasas. And in those Qasas, we gain an understanding of history. A third of the Quran deals with the issue of the oneness of Allah, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. That's the core. A third of the Quran deals with the knowledge of the halal and the haram with regard to worshipping Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and the means by which we worship Allah, the principles underlying that worship. And then a third of the Quran consists of stories that remind us of the reality of the hereafter and what it means to fall in line with the command of Allah. So the Quran itself is a book which came into a historical period. That's why we talk about the Meccan Quran and the Medinan Quran. Not that they're two different Qurans, but it's one revelation speaking to different contextual realities. The reality of Mecca, the reality of Medina, and that has its own details. The Quran itself came gradually. One of the distinguishing points between the Quran and and the revelations that came before is the fact that the Quran was revealed all at once and it was then revealed gradually. It was revealed all at once in Laylatul Qadr, and then gradually we find that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and from there the believers took the knowledge of the Deen in increments. We find that the contextual reality of the Quran is best understood when we look at the occasions for revelation and the reasons for revelation. There's Asbab al-Nuzul, and it's not only an issue of cause for ayah to be revealed, but also the context of revelation itself. We know if the Quran was revealed during a particular season, or if the Quran was revealed while the Prophet was traveling, or the situations surrounding the revelation of the Quran are understood. This is why the reality of the Quran is taken from understanding the teachings of the companions and the narrations of the companions. Either what they narrated directly from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regard to what he did, what he said, what he consented to, al-qawl, al-fi'l, wal-taqrir, or statements that pertain to situations which they describe with regard to the Quranic revelation. All of that assists in the idea of understanding the Quran. Basically, the idea here is that we're making a case that the Quran engages history, engages the time of the human being. Because the human being is a mukallaf, the human being is sahib al-taklif. He's responsible, she's responsible before Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, responsible before Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala with regard to the revelation once a certain stage of life hits. As a matter of fact, this reality is tied into the whole objective of nubuwah. The whole objective of revelation is to bring forth a hujjah, right? The concept of revelation and prophethood is to bring forth a hujjah at the end of the day. Meaning that يعني بعد تبليغ الدعوة يعني الحجة علينا، الحجة هي علينا. أما نكون من أصحاب الدعوة أو نكون من أمة الإسلام. And so, you know, the reality of this situation is that once the revelation comes, prophecy is a consequence of that. The prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a proof against us. Either now we're the companions of the people that need to receive da'wah, right, ummatul da'wah, or we're the companions of ummatul ijab, right, those, that ummah that has already submitted to Islam is in that process of correcting itself and submitted to the Deen. The peoples of the dunya can be divided into those two camps. Those in needing da'wah from the angle of not reminder of the Deen in this basic form. Like we remind each other, we give each other da'wah. But from the angle of what? From the angle of coming from out of kufr into iman. Those who is very clear they don't believe. So the reality of the situation is that the Deen speaks to the human being, speaks to the historical context, speaks to all of humanity. You can't have the issue of a hujjah being against the people, a case and an argument made against humanity, right? With regard to obedience or disobedience, you can't have the issue of punishment or reward in its real sense if the people haven't been given the opportunity to accept or reject. it's possible for Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala to do what Allah wants. That's not an issue here. We're not arguing these theoretical points in Aqeedah. What we're bringing to the fore is something very simple. The simple point is this: that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent to all of humanity, all of the creation, rahmatan lil alamin, as a compassion, as manifestation of the love of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. As some of the people of tafsir indicate, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mission is a manifestation of the love of Allah for humanity. Allah didn't only create us to punish us, but Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala created us to guide us. And not only just for the angle of being in a state of worship, right? If that was the case, then we would be like angels. No, we have a responsibility in the dunya, right? We have a responsibility in the dunya. The reason why I say it like this is because some people confuse the issue of ibadah. They think that ibadah is limited only to the arkan of Islam, and they forget the issue of al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar is part of ibadah. The issue of just transactions is part of ibadah. The issues of taking care of the poor, part of ibadah. Issues of just economy, part of ibadah. Surah al-Mutaffifin, right? Surah al-Ma'un. You know, those sort of the Quran and others indicate to the responsibility that we have to have a just economic dealings. Our responsibility to the poor, to feed the poor, to engage our neighbor, to be charitable. The Quran itself is the Book of Tawhid. And it's a book which speaks to a human being which can practice it. That's why the ulama usul al-fiqh, they have a whole debate among themselves with regard to a taklif bil muhal. Is it possible to be obligated to something that you can't practice? Right? That's not the nature of Islam. The nature of Islam is that the legislation of Islam is practical. You know, making up a word here. It's something that can be practiced. Right? It's something that can be engaged. It's practical. It can be practicable. Right? You can practice it. That being the case, any dawah effort will always speak to the reality of the people. This is one of the reasons why human beings were sent as prophets. Alayhimussalam. The prophets were sent to their peoples, to their communities. Only the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent to all of humanity, to the creation as a whole. That's one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. If that was not the case, then we will have an issue with regard to Islam, with regard to specifically the Quran being the last revelation, because humanity would be in need of another revelation to come to deal with the conditions and the situations of the people. And so Islam always has to be understood in that light and in that context, that it's relatable, right? There's a relatability of Islam to life, the life of the human being. Yani da'na bishan al-jinn. Yani we don't, the issues of the jinn, yani because the Quran is addressing the jinn and the human beings, because the jinn are those creatures that have volition, they have choice. So there's taklif there, right? They're responsible for what they do. That's not our realm. That's not our issue. Our issue is the issue of the human being, right? And so at the end of the day, if Islam is not relatable to life, human life, and that's why I made this point. I detoured in that direction because we're talking about human life, your life, my life, your daily life, your life at Walmart, your life on the internet, your life at your job, your life with your spouse, your life in search of a spouse, your life as a broke person, as a rich person, your life. The Deen comes to address your life, right? In 1440 Hijri, right? Or in 2019, the Deen comes in the 21st century to address the reality of the 21st century. We're not living in the time of the Salaf. We're not living in the time of the Ottoman Empire. We're not living in the time of the Sokoto Empire. We're not living in the time of the Abbasid period. We're not living in the time of the Fatimid period. You know, we're not living in a time period. We're living in this time period, right? This reality that we have to deal with. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal, and some of the brothers, they go with Shaykh al-Albani, and that's rahmatullahi alayhi, that's on them. But Shaykh al-Albani is not a hujjah on anybody. You know, with the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal, with regard to the Prophet sending Mu'adh as a judge to Yemen, and Mu'adh asked the question, what will you judge by? It's not my issue if you go with Shaykh al-Albani on that. You got to work out your own minhaj after that. You know, but when we look at the ulama of usul al-fiqh, when we look at Shawkani, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Amir al-Sana'ani, Ibn Kathir, right? Among others, they say that the hadith of Mu'adh, yani salihun al-ihtijaj bih, is a hujjah, could be used as a proof. If Shaykh al-Albani, yani qawl al-fard at this point, yani he is a singular person that has a position on the hadith. He doesn't agree with the hadith being sound, and he doesn't use it. And some of the brothers in the Salafi Dawah, they have trekked that path with him. That's not my issue. You have your proof, we have our proof. You know what I'm saying? And so that at the end of the day, the hadith stands for us. So the hadith, and by the way, Ibn Taymiyyah is Ibn Taymiyyah. Imam Shawkani is Imam Shawkani. Ibn Kathir is Ibn Kathir. And we all know that they were Athari and Aqeedah. So the issue here is, it's not an Aqeedah issue. It's an issue of ilm, and istinbat, and tahqiq, wal-bahth al-ilmi, is research, is verification, right? All of that type of stuff. So in the hadith of Mu'adh, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sends Mu'adh as a judge to Yemen. And in sending Mu'adh as a judge to Yemen, he basically quizzes him. Because when we talk about minhaj of the Salaf, we need to know what we're talking about, right? We need to put aside the empty rhetoric. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam trained leading companions on how to understand the book and the Sunnah. So when we say that we understand the book and the Sunnah, ma fahm al-Salaf, with the understanding of the generations that came before, what do you mean by that? And so what's meant by that is that the early generations were trained by the Prophet Muhammad, as demonstrated in the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal. In this case, Mu'adh is being illustrated as a judge, as being sent as a judge. So he's not just a regular, just companion that has ilm. He's being sent with the ability to determine right and wrong, the hukum between the people. It's not just the issue of a jurist consultant or a mufti, which is you just give advice on the deen. No, what's said is binding. He's coming as a political leader. He's coming as part of a government in that type of concept. Because that's basically what the qada comes back down to. That is part of, you know, rules that have to be obeyed. So Mu'adh is being sent to Yemen, and he's asked, I'm going to summarize the hadith. He asks, you know, what will you judge by? I'll judge by the book. And he says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in response to the question, what will you judge by? And then he says, if I don't find the answer, then, you know, I'll refer to the Sunnah. If I don't find the answer, ijtihad bil right. And so the issue of ijtihad, right, utilizing the principles of ijtihad meaning the ability to research the Quran and the Sunnah, and to look for applications of the Quran and the Sunnah to life situations, human action. All of the rulings of the Deen are going to pretty much pertain, when it comes to the ahkam, pertains to human action, right? And this is tied into the issue of Aqeedah. But at the end of the day, when we talk about the ahkam, we're talking about the rulings that pertain to human action. And so that hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal indicates that the deen deals with new situations by that process of ijtihad. And that process of ijtihad is understanding how the Quran and the Sunnah relate to each other, how to be able to take examples that were ruled on in the past and match them to new situations, how to reason, how to deal with the Arabic language. That's a whole topic in and of itself, with lessons, series of lessons on understanding the whole process of the minhaj in that regard. This is what we're not told in kindergarten, right? Kindergarten dawah. We're not told kindergarten dawah that this is a process. So when we want to talk about the understanding of the Sahaba, of the Quran and the Sunnah, then now we got to hang with the big boys, with Ahl al-Ilm, with Kibar al-Ilm. We have to understand what that means in application. That means that you don't take a hadith and you apply it on your own, or ayah of the Quran, or a translation that you heard, or some fatwa that you heard from the internet, or some Shaykh that you talk on Pow Talk, or this, that. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi in I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, he indicated that the mufti should be from the people. Just like Mu'adh was being sent to his people, not only to give them da'wah, call them to Tawhid. Because we have another hadith, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, which indicates that Mu'adh was being sent to his people to teach them Tawhid. They were already people that believed, but he was going to correct their Aqeedah. And there was a minhaj and dawah as well. There was not just a minhaj on how to deal with the issues of judging with the angle of the halal and haram, but there was also a minhaj and dawah. First, call the people to Tawheed. They already believe in Allah. You don't have to convince them of believing in Allah, but they have issues in their Aqeedah that need to be corrected. If they obey you in that, obligate upon them the salah. If they obey you in that, then keep following, educating them and obligating them to the what? To the arkan of Islam, hadith and meaning, or fiqh of the hadith. And so there's a minhaj in da'wah. The minhaj in da'wah, a methodology in da'wah, is that you're dealing with human beings. So you have to know how to deal with the people, right? Look at the treatment of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the munafiqeen. Why didn't the Prophet knew who the munafiqeen were. The Prophet could have rooted them out. Why didn't he root them out? Minhaj of da'wah. Minhaj of da'wah. There were people that came into the salah in the time of the da'wah early on. They came high, drunk. Why didn't they get kicked out of the masjid? Minhaj of da'wah. There was a process of educating. There was a cat that came into the masjid and just peed in the masjid. He took out his thing and peed in the masjid. The Sahaba wanted to beat him up, right? Why didn't they just beat him up? Why was there a process in place? Minhaj of da'wah. Minhaj of da'wah. There was an approach to how to deal with da'wah. A fiqh of the da'wah, an understanding of the da'wah. So what was laid out thus far is that the Deen of Islam comes to speak to the human situation. And there's a process in place when it comes to understanding Islam and applying the Deen. And there's also a set of processes that are there when it comes to teaching the Deen and calling people to the Deen. I hope that we understand that this affair is about bringing humanity into the Nur of Tawheed, not about excluding humanity and leaving them in the dhulumat or in the darknesses of kufr, because kufr has different stages and states of darkness, right, so to speak. So that's the first stage. The second thing is this. When we talk about the American community, in specific when we talk about the indigenous community, in specific when we talk about the black community and the Latino community, what has been lost with regard to the Deen in the last 20 years in the shade of the Salafi Dawah? Listen to this. quotations, in the shade of the Salafi Dawah as it was communicated by those who took the responsibility or were recognized as leadership in the groups that were doing dawah. Notice that. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying in the shade of those who engage. What was lost at the end of the day? This is not the place to go into all of the details of positives and negatives and this and that. But one thing I will say is this, that at the end of the day, when you look at the indigenous community across the nation, the amount of masajid that the indigenous community has is few. The amount of masajid that the indigenous community has with regard to being established, educational centers, community centers, social service centers, dealing with the issues of the people. Because remember that the Salaf established Bayt al-Mal, they established services for the community. They just didn't only call the people to Tawheed, right? If Mu'adh was sent, if Mu'adh bin Jabal was sent to Yemen, was he only sent to call the people to Tawheed? Or did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam give him a methodology? And eventually, some point in there, Mu'adh bin Jabal is being told, if they obey you in this, if they obey you in this, we get to the issue of zakat. So if there's an issue of zakat, that means that the poor are being taken care of. That means there's issues of economy, business transactions. That means there has to be some fiqh of the deen. It's not an issue that you just go open up a store in the inner city and you're slinging crack, or you're slinging heroin, or you're selling pork, you know, or you're doing stick-ups and robbing people, and then you come to the masjid and you're giving your 2.5 on zakat. It doesn't work like that. You're not on the corner of the block, you know, getting rid of weight. You're not on the corner of the block making sure the Jamaicans don't take over, or you plotting to take over where the Puerto Ricans are selling. You know, this is the type of stuff that goes on in the inner city. You know, that's not how zakat is built. Zakat is not built on that type of concept. Zakat is built on the understanding that the Muslims, how they engage in business transactions, there's rules to that, right? It's not just a free-for-all. So you see the reality of dawah, that Mu'adh is being sent to his people, teach Tawheed, and then what? And then if they obey you in this, you teach them that they have other obligations. And that's what we find in the hadith of Jibreel, right? In other words, teach them Islam. So from there, we get this understanding, right? That what has happened is that within the indigenous community, we've reached a point at which the infrastructure that was built by different groups that they were searching for Islam, they may not have had a sound knowledge on everything, but they had enough knowledge to understand that there was a necessity to build institutions. Those gains that were made, a lot of them, those gains have been lost. Even in environments in which it was known that, you know, the Muslims should have community, that they should have housing, they should create some sort of marketplace, that they should have educational services, that type of thing. In those places where that was taking place, I know a community here in Ohio where there was once apartment building, property ownership, school, masjid, people living around the masjid, poof, is gone, right? And so that's just an example. And so across the country, what you have seen is that the indigenous community, at one time, it was moving towards building institutions. That's not to say that everything was perfect, ideal, on point, you know, prior to the Salafi Dawah, because it wasn't. But what we have lost is the understanding of the obligation to build community, the obligation to serve community, the obligation to maintain our institutions, the obligation to uphold some sort of dignity. And what has happened in the community is a lot of back and forth. And a lot of this, at the end of the day, comes back to one major issue. People just didn't, no matter how much sincerity that they had no real plan of how to move forward that you can see it has materialized now. And there was no continuing education. There was no educational aspirations from the angle of, okay, we talk Quran and Sunnah as being the priority. Okay, so where are the institutions to teach Quran and Sunnah? In the last 20 years, you know, we should have seen at least like 5 institutions built solely to teach Quran and Sunnah. Right? Memorization of the Quran, Islamic sciences, Hadith, solely for that reason. So that's one of the issues, that we've lost a sense of community, a sense of ourselves, a sense of responsibility, a sense of dignity in being able to stand on our own. And we have collapsed our own concept of leadership, even to the point where we doubt whether someone can be called Shaykh or Imam or this and that. And some of that is with good cause and some of it is not. Some of it is extremely problematic. No community exists in the dunya like that. That the only people that are called Mashaykh are the people from another place. No community exists like that except here in the U.S. Right? That type of undermining of authority, it gives the ability to do whatever you want. You know, we understand that there's some qualification issues and we understand the details of all that. But okay, all of that aside. So now we go into the third phase. First phase was the issue of Islam being revealed in history and time and place to humanity, you know, and it's something that can be practiced. It's something that speaks to the time period of the people, their needs, that type of thing. Second phase was a reflection on, you know, the whole loss of the sense of community building, sense of dignity, the sense of responsibility to the community, sense of leadership, and the demise of the masajid now that were, you know, that were basically controlled by the indigenous community. The numbers have decreased dramatically. We have a major crisis on our hands with regard to that. And also the splintering of the community in 1,000 different ways. Burnouts, so on and so forth. A lot of issues with that. Breakups, you know, a lot of division. And, okay, so then we move to the other phase now. The third phase is that, okay, when we talk about the da'wah of Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, rahmatullahi alayh, one thing that you have to understand is that Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, leave aside all the conspiratorial stuff, but it's a fact that the British Empire, it had infiltrated the Muslim world. Right, it had infiltrated Africa, what's now termed as the Middle East, had infiltrated. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt that the British Empire had some hand in assisting the Saudis, in assisting the situation in Palestine, you know, creating it, the problem as it is. There's no doubt about that. But regardless of all of that, at the end of the day, there was something that was called the Ottoman Empire. And at the end of the day, there was something that it can be said for the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire declined on a lot of different levels. The Saudis by themselves, as a political force that arose in the Hijaz, from out of Najd, were not enough to give a blow to the Ottoman Empire. They contributed it to the whole reality. But we have to admit that Kemal Ataturk, as a leader in the Turkish Empire, he contributed as well. He secularized Turkey, he nationalized Turkey, and he abolished the Khilafah. So that was part of it. There's a lot of different factors, to the decline of the Muslims politically and economically, and you know, as a presence on the world global scene. But the da'wah of Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab was some sort of effort to safeguard Deen and establish Deen in that community that he was in. That's not the only effort. You had the effort of Shaykh Uthman bin Fodio. You had the effort of Shah Waliullah. You had the effort of Shawkani, you know, and Amir Sanani and all of that crew that was in Yemen. You had a number of different movements all over the Muslim world that everybody was trying to engage this whole question of what do we do with the decline of the Muslim community. So Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab is not a prophet, right? He's a teacher. Some of them call him a reviver. He revived some aspects. You know, he did bring back, between him and the House of Saud, they brought back the Hanbali madhab with some strength. You know, and they brought back aspects of the Deen. There's no doubt about that, and also caused problems, just like other people cause problems as well. Muhammad Abdul, he brought back some aspects of the Deen. Shaykh Muhammad Abdul from Al-Azhar from Egypt, and also he caused some problems when it came to some understandings. But Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, he is not a prophet. He's a scholar. And he's a scholar not equal to Ibn Taymiyyah, right? Not equal to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, but he's a scholar that has a certain type of program, certain mentality. So in the midst of all this decline, Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, he looks at certain issues. Mind you, the reason why I keep mentioning Ibn Taymiyyah is because he tries to base himself off of Ibn Taymiyyah. And so one of the things that he did do is bring back to the fore the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn Taymiyyah's role historically is debatable, right? Meaning how much impact he had in the past. I think the impact that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has, we feel it more today than it was felt in the past, right? And that's not taking away anything from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It means that sometimes you give certain things more emphasis in one time period than you do in another time period, right? And that's just a reality. He was there, he was a voice, but I think that now we can appreciate Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's works more than maybe in the past, because maybe in the past he didn't have as much respect and regard. You know, that happens historically. Sometimes the genius type of concept is discovered after the fact, just like the artist is not appreciated till after the artist dies. That's kind of a concept that's there. But Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, he looks at his situation and he looks for certain practices that he looks at, and he looks at the issue that those practices need to be corrected. This was something that was taking place in India, something that was taking place in Egypt. It was taking place throughout in Africa, other places of Africa, outside of Egypt. You know, people were looking at why did the Muslims decline, and we need to reform our behaviors. We need to reform practices that are not from the Deen and come into a practice of the Deen. So Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, he leaned in that direction. And so some of the things that he focused on were things that were what? Things that were acceptable in the Ottoman Empire. And so Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, one of the things that he did in reading Ibn Taymiyyah, he came up with a concept of establishing a political order. Listen to me. Listen to me. He came up with the idea of establishing a political order that will support the practice of the Deen. And so the concept of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi was that the scholars should align themselves with political leadership or power, and the two should complement each other. And that's what happened. The house or the family of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab took on the religious leadership, and then the tribe of Saud, they took on the political leadership, and that's how Saudi Arabia emerged. The Book of Tawhid basically was a manifesto arguing that certain practices were problematic in the environment of the Hijaz, which ultimately will mean that they would have to assert some sort of authority, they would have to resort to some sort of power struggle in order to establish what they wanted to establish in the Book of Tawhid. And so then eventually they break from the Ottoman Empire, you know, and part of the concept was, you know, struggling against the Ottoman Empire, you have to have some sort of legitimacy because you're going against the political leadership of the time, the Khalifa of the time. So part of it was to delegitimize the leadership from the angle of, look at what's in the environment. There's a decline in the Deen, and there's practices of bid'ah, practices even they considered shirk. And so we have the right to establish a cleaner understanding of the Deen. That was the concept that was it. And so the point of the Book of Tawhid is that it's making an argument for why the people of Najd and the Hijaz should establish their own community in practicing the Deen and have some sort of sovereignty, right? And so that was the struggle that took place in phases. It didn't take place just at one time. It took place in phases. What's the point of this? That the Book of Tawhid is speaking to the reality and the context of what was taking place in the Hijaz. And what was the argument that the Mashaykh of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, meaning his family as being a people of ilm and so on and so forth, what they had is a concept of what the deen should be as far as established in practice, and the House of Saud. And so the concept of the Book of Tawhid is that it established for the people of the Hijaz, in specific for those who came from Najd, in specific for the House of Saud and the house of Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab. That's why they say, Yani Ali Shaykh, the family of the Shaykh. You know, some people are called the family of the Shaykh. They're referring to Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab, or the Mujaddid, they say, the reviver. And so then, it's not uncommon that Aqeedah books will deal with certain situations, like Usul al-Sunnah. Usul al-Sunnah by Imam Ahmed rahmatullahi alayhi. It's not dealing with every issue in Aqeedah. That's why in Usul al-Sunnah there's no talk of Asma'i wa Sifat and detail and all of that type of stuff. It's dealing with certain key issues. Because books of Aqeedah usually deal with key issues that are taking place in a particular time period. The Rasail or the epistles or the letters of Ibn Taymiyyah to people, many of them like Aqeedah Tahawiyya or Aqeedah Hamawiyya or Aqeedah Tadmuriyya, and a series of other books that he wrote, Al-Isfahaniyya and all of that type of stuff. You know, a lot of those books are addressing issues, questions that people have with regard to belief in their context, in their situation, in their time period. And so that's how a lot of Aqeedah Tahawiyya is the same thing. Aqeedah Tahawiyya is addressing, you know, what the community is believing, and part of it is dealing with issues at that time period. Part of it is dealing with the debates that are there. When we see Risala ila Ahl al-Thaqr by Shaykh al-Islam Abu Hassan al-Ashari. Abu Hassan al-Ashari at one time was Mu'tazila. And then, you know, there in Risala ila Ahl al-Thaqr or Al-Ibana, those books, you see that he switches. He's more authority in his approach. And so he's dealing with issues that come up in his time period that were discussed in the community. You know, even the whole question of the Mu'tazila, you know, that comes up is about issues as a group. They're dealing with issues that come up in their time period. They were actually, Mu'tazila were a group of people that were actually having discussions with the people of the book and the philosophers and others. And they took a certain approach on how to deal with it, which is not the approach of the people of the Sunnah, but it is an approach. So that was the standard across the board. The standard across the board, that Aqeedah books were written dealing with the context of the people and issues that came up. So there's no difference with the Book of Tawhid. And so then the issue comes up in Aqeedah studies. Okay, so now how are you dealing with Deen in your environment? How are you dealing with the context of the issues in your environment? Issues such as belief in Nubuwwah, belief in prophets or prophethood, or belief in the Quran revelation, or belief in Allah, the issue of atheism and all that, or agnosticism, or any of the new schools of thought that have emerged which cause doubt on the issue of Tawhid. We don't find that many people are dealing with those issues. And so then, you know, Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab rahmatullahi, he pretty much did a service to his community, right? Whether we like it or not, whether we're pro or against, he did a service to his community. That's a sociological fact. You know, he was able to align himself with those people who were able to harness power. They were able to create a political environment for themselves. And now, you know, the Saudi Arabia controls oil. It controls, or to some extent, you know, it controls some land. And it's not the only tribe that's there in that area. There's other tribes in Jazan and all of that in Saudi Arabia. There's other tribes that exist in Saudi Arabia as a whole. But they were able to achieve something for their people. And so then that becomes the problem with the contemporary Salafi Dawah in the U.S. What are you achieving for your people? I'm not saying you go out there and you take the same steps that Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab took, because he launched a revolt against the political authorities of his time. He launched an uprising rebellion. They came to power by the sword, like it or not. You can't deny history. That's just a reality. But as far as Aqeedah servicing the people, That's the question. Book of Tawhid is not the Book of Tawhid. The Book of Tawhid is the Quran. It's the Book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Right? The Book of Tawhid is the Book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But the whole concept that you see in the Book of Tawhid compiled by Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahab rahmatullahi alayhi is the idea of addressing issues in his community with pertaining to Aqeedah. And so that's the challenge of the contemporary Dawah efforts. Not only the Salafis, right? That's the same issues with those who are claiming to be Ash'ari and Maturidi and all of that. They claim to be rational. They claim to have rational proofs and proofs from the Quran and Sunnah. And in the midst of this, you know, people have issues with Dawkins. They have issues with all of these different madhahib, you know, and they don't know how to deal with it. You know, there's a lot of intellectual confusion. So Aqeedah studies in that regard is in a state of crisis. You know, people don't really understand how to deal with Aqeedah studies. You know, Aqeedah studies is not something that's frozen in the past, like what was said by some Shaykh, may Allah have mercy on him, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. Everything that person said is relevant for today. Like, that's revelation. It doesn't work like that. The revelation is the book and the Sunnah, the Quran and the Sunnah. The ijtihadat of the ulama, sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't apply, right? And so that's just a reality. And so at the end of the day, yeah, the core of Tawheed remains the same and so on and so forth. But if Aqeedah studies are not dealing with the issues of the people, like for instance, we could raise a question. Is addiction in today's time a form of shirk? Because addiction, يعني ارتباط الناس بالأشياء، يعني the رابط بين الشيئين، يعني شخص وشيء، you know, the attachment that a person, an individual will have with a thing, you know, sometimes it will get to a point of junoon, insanity. And we can't say that it's completely excusable always. But sometimes addiction reaches a point where a person will do everything for that thing, right? And do everything, sacrifice time, self, money, everything. So is it a form of shirk? Possible. You know, we're not dealing with that type of stuff. You know, the idea that people think they know everything. They're the source of knowledge. They're the source of understanding. They're the source of right and wrong. That's an Aqeedah issue. It's not being dealt with in today's time. So Aqeedah studies, they come and they deal with the reality of the people in the community. If it's not that, then that means that people are they're not understanding the objectives of Aqeedah study. They're not understanding the objectives of Dawah. And so that's the crisis in the contemporary Salafi Dawah right now, is that, you know, they don't understand. There's other books that are better to teach from with the same Aqeedah, like Ma'arij al-Qabul. You know, there's other books to teach Aqeedah from. Look at a book like the 77 Branches of Iman, you know, by Imam al-Bayhaqi, which was abridged by Shaykh al-Qazwini, rahmatullahi alayhim. That book is a much more bright, in the sense that it's a book of Aqeedah. There's not issues of debate in it. It's a book of Aqeedah which teaches you about life, teaches you about beauty, teaches you about Allah, your responsibilities to other people, you know, where you should be with yourself. You know, it teaches you that the whole of the Deen is tied into belief, you know, and it makes you a person that, you know, we're obligated to better ourselves. That's another factor, that the hadith of Jibreel teaches us that part of the Deen is the purification of the self. The issue of ihsan comes back also to the issue of tazkiyat an-nafs, purification of the heart, purification of the self. And so that has been a missing factor in the way that Dawah has been, you know, engaged. So, you know, that the Quran sometimes indicates that some of us will follow our desires, and we will make our desires like God, like an object of worship. May Allah forgive us and protect us from our very selves and from the whisperings of shaitan. It's a reality. Again, you know, we indicated to that issue with the point of addiction. But tazkiyat an-nafs has to come in into the teaching of Aqeedah. There's a lot of issues, like for instance in the Salafi Dawah, you know, the really teachings of Ibn al-Qayyim when it comes to the heart when it comes to being a better person spiritually, that was kind of left out. People have stayed focused on certain books in Aqeedah. Even with the issue of Kitab al-Tawhid, really the issue has become, Sunan al-Barbahari. And Imam al-Barbahari is known who he is, rahmatullahi alayhi. He was, a very distinct Hanbali scholar. He was very sharp at the tongue. And he was very strong against those who opposed him. So there's a character issue there too. Like, I follow the Prophet Muhammad. We follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's like, scholars, we love them and this, that, but they don't take precedence to the example and the model of the one who was sent by Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. You don't have a hujjah for that. You don't have a proof against that point, in other words. That there's someone that can come and take the place of the model of the Prophet Muhammad with regard to compassion, with regard to dawah, dealing with the people, or the companions themselves, with regard to the issue of dawah and so on and so forth. So scholars we take, and we, some things we take from, and some things we reject, but not everybody's on that level. That's the problem of education that we talked about before. How to use the tools that the scholars give us in their writings and their teachings. Not everyone is on that level. And that's the problem of not investing in education. Muslim community is one of the communities that invest the least in leadership and in education compared to the other communities here from the people of the book and other religions. Imams are the least paid, least stable. Rabbis are the most paid, 6-figure salaries. That's why those communities flourish. And that's not to say that I'm advocating six-figure salaries for imams. That's not the point. The point being stability, investment. So at the end of the day, Aqeedah studies that don't deal with the reality of the community and don't deal with the issues that the people are going through in the now really are not fulfilling their function and their role. If Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, whether we agree with him or not, addressed what he felt was the issues of his people, and then we can't say, oh, well, Aqeedah is not political. Man, they launched a political movement. That was a political movement. They went up against the leader of the time and established a government. I don't think that gets more political than that. Even if in the Book of Tawhid, there's no direct relationship to politics, it is at the end of the day. Because when they're talking about certain actions, those were actions that were allowable in the ultimate empire. That's not to say that we agree with them. Certain things that are talked against in the Book of Tawhid, it becomes a manifesto. The Book of Tawhid becomes a manifesto for delegitimizing the authority of the Ottoman Empire in the Hijaz, and why a case is made for establishing the Deen. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And again, this is not to knock Muhammad Abdul Wahab or to be pro Muhammad Abdul Wahab, or this is the issue. We're talking about something more serious than that. The issue of taking care of our people. The issue of the Deen speaking to the conditions of our people. We're talking about the issues of understanding the efficacy of Islam, right? The efficacy of Islam is important. Islam is viable as a way of life. We don't have issues with Islam. If we have issues with people, we have issues with ideas, but not with Islam. That's kufr. If we have issues with Islam, we have a problem with ourselves that we have to work through. A person can have a doubt, okay, fine. We're not going to take them out of the Deen for that. But we're obligated to work through the issues. We're obligated to work through the issues, right? And so then that's where the Deen has to be efficacious. And it is. The Deen is efficacious. It's us that we're lacking in our ability to be able to translate and articulate how it is that the Deen works. It's not all 100% our fault. The Muslim world is in that crisis overall. Don't think that it's us here in the U.S. only. No. Muslim world is in a crisis, right? Because of the lack of investment. There's a sort of attempts to revive, like Saudi Arabia for a while was dumping money into scholarship, and they kind of, now they're putting it in other areas like science and all, and so now they're trying to kind of deal with more contemporary issues. Turkey now, before they were putting money into like the, medicine and engineering and math and all that type of stuff. And now they're trying to put more money into the whole idea of building imams and schools to study Sharia. So Malaysia is more balanced, in that regard. They put money into the education on the sciences of Islam and the sciences that are necessary to take our place in the dunya as human beings. Do we want to be, the ones that are always behind on every technology? Shouldn't we be at the forefront somewhere? At least in medicine, right? After all, we produce a lot of doctors and engineers. Shouldn't we be the ones that dominate in those fields? That's not the mentality of the Muslims. The mentality of the Muslims is very laid back. We're not the ones that are discovering in the dunya. We're not the ones that are going, exploring under the earth. We're not the ones that are transforming things. So that means we don't understand the Quranic imperative of our responsibility in the dunya. Then, there's another factor that the Quran teaches us too, that everyone is not going to be empowered in civilization perpetually in the dunya. Everyone gets their share. But as Muslims, historically, everywhere that the Muslims went, civilization arose, except for the U.S. That's the problem that we have. Everywhere Islam went, any country, it didn't remain backward culturally, civilizationally, intellectually, did it? We didn't have that problem. We had a problem with big heads. The Mu'tazila were big heads. They were like intellectual Nazis. That they forced their position. And we have that sometimes in Islamic history, that we have groups that try to force their position. But reason was never a problem for the Muslims. Muslims always opened the door to reason. The problem for the Muslims was an exaggeration in reason, unlike Christianity. But the point is this, that everywhere Islam went, historically, those people materially became successful. And that's another issue. That, historically, Muslims became successful. They forgot their deen. And so, but the deen teaches us balance. The deen teaches us balance. But for us in the U.S., we have to learn how to operate with our deen. Our deen is not our enemy, is our companion, is our safeguard, is what will uplift us, is our shelter of dignity, is what will uphold us as human beings. And that's why it deserves more from us than what we actually give it. And I'm not saying that to lord over anyone like I'm perfect or saying, that's not what I'm saying. We have to be in the situation where we come to an understanding of how to work with the deen. It's like having the best cell phone on earth and not knowing how to use it. You can do so many things with it, but you don't know how to work with it. Or the best piece of technology, and the only thing you do, is you just use one aspect. And that's kind of where we're at with the deen. We have the best deen, but we only just focus on certain aspects, and not even those have we mastered. And so we end with that, with saying that Aqeedah studies, at the end of the day, it has to relate to the situation of the people, right? It has to end with the situation of the people. And we as a community cannot marginalize our issues. Because when you marginalize your issues, what you do is you alienate yourself from the deen. You have to have some way to relate to Islam. Islam speaks to you. That's why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent to all of humanity. He wasn't sent so that it's like we're watching a conversation between other communities. Islam, how does it speak to the Turks? Islam, how does it speak to the Egyptians? Islam, how does it speak to the Saudi Arabians? Yeah, Islam, how does it speak to the Uzbekis? And we're just sitting in the spotlight. We're sitting in the bleachers watching the whole event. We never ask, Islam, how does it speak to you? In Cleveland, Ohio, in Brooklyn, New York, in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., or any part of the world that you're in which the Muslims are living in similar conditions that we live. How does Islam speak to you, to your family, to your situation? And if we don't have that mentality of understanding that, we always feel outside. And that's what's happening to our children. Islam is alienating. Islam is a feeling of alienation. When it comes to the Quran, most of us don't understand even the Fatiha properly. I'm not saying even how to recite, but I'm saying the meaning, the impact, because Arabic is not part of the deal for us. When it comes to understanding the deen, it doesn't go beyond the basics. So there's a major disconnect. We're in a situation now which is very similar to what happened with the Catholics and Latin, that their worship was in Latin. And the people were just, they would just sit there, you know, sit there like, oh, yeah. All right, is this over? Okay, mashallah. So we have reverence without fiqh, without understanding, without comprehension. That's not good. Or we have rote memory without comprehending how that stuff applies. So at the end of the day, we leave it with that. We have to have a balance. Aqeedah has to be accompanied with purification of the heart, good character, community building, community service. Aqeedah studies should deal with uplifting the community. And at the end of the day, we have to build the leadership which is sound. It's not to knock anyone that came before, but it's to say that, you know, okay, we have the experience now. Past 20 years, what are we going to wait for? A whole generation, you know, to see the mistakes and how to correct them? No, we need to learn that Islamic sciences are viable. The Deen of Islam is viable. Is that we have some issues. And these issues will not be solved by scholars from overseas in entirety. Some of them will be able to assist us. Some of them will get dirty with us. And many of them will not. Because they have to deal with their own issues. They can't even deal sometimes with the issues in their own societies. Go to a Yemeni Shaykh. Well, Yemen now is messed up. May Allah bless them. But go to a Yemeni Shaykh who's used to seeing his tribe, meaning his cousin's family and his uncle's family, his brother's family, his son's family. And they have 3 wives here, 4 wives here, 2 wives here. They live in a village together. They work together. They all speak the same language. They all have the same culture. And go explain to him, go ask him, you know, what do you do with a family in which the brother came from a divorced family? He's Muslim, but his family is not Muslim. He married a sister who was raised by her stepfather, right? And he had a child by her. And then she took the child and she put him in court for child support. Another brother came in and he's raising the child. You know, and how do you deal with that situation? They look at you and they're like, and I've taken a case to an Egyptian sheikh and a Yemeni sheikh, and they're like, these things happen? That's where they're at. They can't comprehend. So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he said that the faqih or the mufti should be from the people themselves. And so we have a lot of work to do. Social services, we have a lot of empowerment work to do. You know, and we have a double jeopardy situation. Double jeopardy, what is it? That the sciences, you can go get a degree for social work, counseling, this and that. That stuff doesn't apply to us. It applies to white society. We don't even exist in the society. Indigenous people don't exist really in the society. Most of the stuff is not even applicable to us. So we have work to do on that front, the liberation front, and then we have work to do on the front of knowledge of the Deen and how to apply it. We have a lot of work to do. We don't have time to be arguing with each other. We only have time to really try to figure out how to work out our existence, how to empower our people, you know, how to deal with our situations, how to safeguard our families. We don't have time for any other sidetrack type of situation. We don't have time to be concerned with this or that. That's useless. That's not part of the priorities. Yani, we have something in the Deen. I definitely want to end with this. It's called Wajib al-Waqt in Fiqh al-Awlawiyat. Right? Wajib al-Waqt is what is the obligation of the moment. Right? Safeguarding our families. We're losing, you know, we're in the process of state of emergency, almost genocide. Then the other issue is the fiqh of priorities. You know, wudu comes before salah if you need to make wudu. If the time is about to go out of dhuhr, you have to pray dhuhr. You don't pray sunnahs. You know, that's how it works. You know, there's a priority to acts. And so the time sometimes will dictate what the priority is. And so the priority right now is that we safeguard our families and ourselves. And that's not going to be done solely with just sitting and teaching Tawhid. If that was the case, Mu'adh bin Jabal, radiyallahu anhu, would not have been sent by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to his people. And he was told, yeah, teach them Tawhid. But, you know, once that's basically clear for them, obligate them to Salah. Once they accept in that, you know, obligate them to Zakat, so on and so forth. To the Aqeeda and the Deen, till the Deen is practiced. And again, like we said, can you actually practice Zakat without economy, homie? Can you practice Zakat with brothers on the street selling dope, doing stick-ups? The Zakat money is going to come from that? brothers unemployed? You know, can you practice zakat when majority of your people are in a position of only taking zakat? You know, with the wealth gap. And then people say that the wealth gap is not valid, or they say generational wealth is not an issue. Inheritance in Islam, Quran, Sunnah, remember we followed that? There's examples in which some companions were forbidden by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from giving away all of their wealth so that their families wouldn't stay in poverty and be with the, you know, handout type of thing. And even then, the companions established Baytul Mal, which is a social security system. So if there was poor in the community, they took, you know, from the needs. They took for their needs from the community money. And even natural resources, the community shared the wealth in that. You know, and so there's a lot of stuff that we have to learn from Islam for ourselves. I'm talking about so that it applies to our lives. May Allah forgive me for my mistakes and aid us and help us especially in the state of emergency that we're in. Safeguard our Tawhid and allow us to die in the state of Islam. And at least we ask Allah Ta'ala to allow us to safeguard the generations, you know, and stop the process of genocide that's taking place and destroying our communities. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.